This is Ethics in Context. Welcome your host.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's show. I'm your host, Paul Redenis, and we do hope that you enjoy this very special treat we have in store once again. Our guests tonight are the ethical freedom fighters, here to debate on the ethical issues relating to, you guessed it, trade unions. As many of you might have heard, South Africa's largest trade union, COSATU, has once again announced that protests will be taking place in all 9 provinces throughout the country. These protests will be preceding the annual budget speech as delivered by Finance Minister Mr. Tito Mboweni, and they will be counted against job losses, unemployment, and of course the VAT increase. Joining us tonight is ethics specialist Alicia Roos, here to give us a little bit more insight into the workings of trade unions. Please welcome Alicia Roos with a warm round of applause.
Evening, Paul.
Evening, Alicia.
Thank you for the warm welcome. As always, it's fun being on the show. The objectives of South African trade unions are to negotiate working conditions, to regulate employee and employers' relationships, and to take collective action to enforce preferable terms on behalf of employees. However, with recent developments around the protest within South Africa, we are burdened with the question whether these trade unions and the protests are still ethical or unethical.
Clearly, this is a highly debatable matter. Therefore, we have organized a number of guest speakers to debate on all sorts of hot topics surrounding around the trade unions. So please welcome to the floor the ethical freedom fighters. I'm Javi Redelneist and I'm your host.
I'm Alicia Roos and I'm the ethics specialist.
I'm Armand Besser and I'm arguing for trade unions.
Hi, I'm Stefan du Plessis and I'm arguing against trade unions.
I'm Matthew Peters and I'm arguing against trade unions.
I'm Hans Weber and I'm for trade unions.
I'm Bertus Borenstein, arguing against trade unions.
I'm Martin Drew and I'm arguing for trade unions.
I am Salome Venter and I argue against trade unions.
I am Auris Swart and I am for trade unions.
As they are a very large group, we have divided them into 2. So please welcome to the floor the first group. Welcome guys. Hans. Stefan. Matthew.
People are always making negative comments with regards to trade unions, but I believe they are beneficial towards the company, the employees, but also the economy. The efficiency wage theory states that higher wages often leads to improved productivity. When employees are paid higher wages, studies have shown that they are more loyal towards the company and they are more willing to contribute towards the company's success.
I must object to that statement. According to relevant statistics, only 25% of workers belong to trade unions. This means when wages are increased, that only workers will benefit because the industries will have to increase their prices, which will overall hurt consumers, which in itself is unethical.
In addition to what Stefan has stated, it has been found that the commitment of trade unions to increase the remuneration for the workers has resulted in high unemployment. This is because companies cannot afford these high costs and therefore have to lay off workers. Facts show that manufacturing job losses in South Africa over the past 30 years have been those of trade union members. It is therefore unethical to demand higher wages while sacrificing jobs.
I have to disagree with you, because many companies have monopoly power. These firms have market power in employing employees, which allows them to pay wages below the competitive equilibrium and employ less employees. When trade unions identify these companies as such, they can easily demand higher wages without sacrificing jobs. Alternatively, they can demand higher employment by these companies.
Very insightful from Group 1. Please welcome to the floor Group 2. Welcome to the next group. Martin, Salome, Bertus, Regon.
I would like to elaborate on the effect that these protests have on the families of the workers. More specifically, I would like to reference the 2014 Platinum Mine Workers strike. During this strike, nearly 70,000 AMCU platinum miners went on strike. The strike lasted for 5 months as the workers demanded wage increases more than double the then minimum wage. This was the longest and most expensive protest in South African history. It cost the platinum industry about 24 billion rand. During that strike, roughly 70,000 families were without an income for 5 months. They were impoverished, they lost their homes, and they were starving. All because AMCU was reluctant to accept the fact that it was impossible to meet their demands.
But let's be honest, without trade unions we will still be working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, without paid leave or holidays. Child labour would be overwhelming, as we see in countries without trade unions. In Bangladesh alone, there's 12.6% of children between the age of 4 and 14 are in the labour force. There are therefore many more unethical social dilemmas in the absence of trade unions.
You should bear in mind that companies have a higher cost due to the demand of trade unions. It decreases their profit margins and consequently their capability to invest. This results in the decrease of the country's GDP, and thus the countries such as South Africa's road to economic recovery is delayed.
But let's move our focus to the fact that trade unions are actively reducing inequality. Although companies sacrifice some of their profits, low-level employees are receiving higher wages and increased living standards. This reduces the gap between rich and poor. Studies in the UK from the 1890s to the 1980s have shown that higher activity in trade unions reduced the overall inequality of the country. Once trade union activity declined, inequality increased again.
I would like to add the utilitarian, virtue and deontological theories to the discussion because I believe that it can be applied to today's topic of trade unions. And here is the input of the ethical freedom fighters.
Aristotle states that morality is a prerequisite for living with human dignity. He says that human beings all want a common goal, and that is to live with human dignity and to achieve eudaimonia, which translates to a life well lived. Virtues are those characteristics that enables you to achieve such goals. Aristotle sees virtues as rational principles which humans hold. Some human behavior cannot be rationally controlled, but certain facets thereof can however be controlled.
These facets are inclination to action, which he refers to as our natural disposition, and these positions are rationally controlled before irrational human behavior is exercised. They are called moral virtues, which become a permanent characteristic of a human being. Living according to these virtues are vital for achieving the goal of human dignity.
Virtue theory can be connected to trade unions through the common goal of promoting human dignity. This is because they promote human dignity by fighting on behalf of workers for increased remuneration, which ultimately leads to better living standards for those specific workers.
Moral principles are predetermined for rational thinking and are not dependent on moral virtues created by inclination to act. Moral action therefore requires compliance to these moral principles. Moral guidance is found in our rationality outside of practical experience.
Goodwill is necessary for constant moral behavior. Goodwill obeys the universal moral law. Whether action is moral or not depends on whether the person executing them are of the opinion that it can become universal moral law to act in such a way. One must not act towards subjective goals, but towards objective goals that applies for everyone, such as human dignity. Universal moral rules must be respected, and we must act with a sense of duty to comply with them.
Deontological theory is connected to trade unions as they ensure that companies comply with the universal moral law in relation to their employees by fighting for their rights. Trade unions can also neglect this theory as they are sometimes aware that the matters they are fighting are not in the best interest of certain stakeholders, but still argue over this matter nonetheless.
The morality of actions is judged by their consequences. The action delivering the greatest good to the greatest number of people is regarded morally worthy. This theory states that happiness is the ultimate goal of all human beings. It also believes that people not only strive for their own happiness, but also for that of the society in general.
Utilitarian theory is connected to trade unions, as trade unions try to ensure the maximum amount of workers share the maximum amount of benefits. Through this, trade unions also benefit, as they attract more members, seeing as the potential members will see how they treat their workers.
I believe that it can be concluded that trade unions in its core and what they set out to achieve is ethical. However, trade unions have been known to show no regards for the evaluation of the viability of the business, financials resolving around it, and the trends associated with economic development. This results in trade unions often having demands which are impossible to meet.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. I would also like to add that I think the manner through which they enforce their demands can sometimes become unethical with these violent protests we see so often in South Africa. Therefore, I think we can all recommend that governments should implement policies and procedures more vigorously to regulate these trade union activities. But there you have it, folks. That's all for tonight. It was truly one for the books. Thank you for joining us and have a good one.